Hello and welcome to Heavy Metal Rex. My name is Awais, and I want to welcome you to episode 3 of Tuner Talk. I gotta say, the response I'm getting for this series is incredible. People are coming and telling me how they've had these questions for so long, or they've seen these questions on Reddit and just weren't able to find the right answer. If you have anything you've thought about, whether it's gas, car, tires, doesn't matter. No topic's really off limits. Definitely put it down in the comments. I'll bring it up in the next future videos, and it's great. This is the kind of information we need for the community as a whole. As you can see, I'm holding my camera because for some reason I cannot get my tripod to work, so I'm going to have to fix that. Second, I do want to say thank you to Graham from Boosted Performance for coming back to the channel, reprising his role as our #1 tuner here on Tuner Talk so far. He's got some great information, incredible knowledge. I'm sure he is going to help you guys, especially this video, answer some damn good questions. Anyway, let's get started. Guys, welcome. Graham, thank you so much for coming back for episode 3 of Tuner Talk. For those of you who don't know, Graham is part of Boosted Performance Tuning. Graham, if you don't mind just letting our viewers know just a little bit about yourself.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, like you said, Graham from Boosted Performance. If you watch episode 1, you can see more about who we are, what we do. But yeah, I've been tuning Subarus for I think it's been about 11 years now. It's been a full-time thing since 2016. So somewhere in the ballpark of approaching 5,000 Subarus tuned. It's been going up very quickly lately. Been very, very busy these last couple months. But yeah.
I want to say thank you from myself and all of the viewers for actually coming back. I will say that your video was very popular. There was a lot of questions that were answered, and a lot of people were saying how it's so hard to get this type of information from tuners. And when Anthony from Jugman Tuning, we also mentioned about the same thing, that some tuners feel like this is just such a hidden thing that they can't show people or can't tell people. And I know people have told me how they've gone and done dyno tunes where they've never seen the tuner, they've never even seen the dyno. They just usually see a monitor in a waiting room somewhere, and the next thing you know, the car's done. So this has been a popular series just for information's sake. So again, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome
for doing that. So I just wanted to know, since the last time we've talked, has there been anything new, anything interesting that's happened that you've noticed with the FA24s?
Not really. It's they've been very consistent. We're seeing some new parts come out. We're seeing charge pipes come out. We're seeing some different down pipes come out, or J pipes come out. I know I've been seeing some people. I've already had a couple people hit me up and say, "Hey, I found a catless J pipe for this car," and I'm like, "Nope, that's not going to work." If you want to have your cruise control work and you want to have your eyesight work, and it's tied into all those things now, I'm like, you don't want that. So and there's also some cheap cats coming on the market. So I've been warning people, like, look, stick with the stuff that has the Jesse cat in it. Stick with the well-known brands, because the popularity of this car is going to attract everybody to want to start throwing stuff at it. So we've seen some new parts coming out. Haven't tested a lot of them, but everything we've been working with, we've been sticking with the ETS J pipe, ETS intakes, the BMS intakes like yours. Had a couple the new AEM intakes now. Lots of guys with intercoolers. So I mean, it's the same combination of parts for the most part, and the cars are just behaving really consistent. I would say one thing that has been really cool is we were worried about the torque and the clutches, and so far, knock on wood, no one has reported a clutch slip yet. We're still doing that torque ramp in approach and everything to try to be careful, but so far I haven't even heard of a clutch slipping yet on anybody's car. So that's pretty cool.
That's I'm reason why I ask these questions, these open-ended ones, is there's always something that pops in that makes me want to ask follow-up questions. And there's two things that you brought up that are really, because you mentioned J-pipes and all these extra J-pipes. Have you seen any, I want to say it's P&L just came out with, I think that's the company, they just came out with a J-pipe. It's a little bit more expensive, like $1,600. But have you seen that one on any car yet?
No. What does it do differently?
No. I haven't seen, it looks almost the same.
I know they made one, and I think they didn't put in that secondary cat like the ETS has. Now, the thing is, the primary cat's doing all the heavy lifting, right? And the front O2 sensors in front of it to measure the AFR coming out of the engine, then the rear O2 sensors right behind that primary cat to measure the efficiency of the cat. The secondary cat is after that. it's still technically an emissions control part of the J pipe. So, if someone's trying to make a J pipe and they want to make sure that the EPA doesn't come knock on their door and say, hey, you've removed a part of the emissions control device, being that secondary cat, it's good to put both on there, which is why ETS did it. Some of the companies are just throwing caution to the wind, and they're just putting on a Jesse pipe, a Jesse cat up in the front where it needs to be, but they're just going straight pipe after that. Perhaps maybe a little bit more performance, but at the trade-off of potentially risking some litigation there. But so that's one difference, I believe, if I saw correctly on the P&L J pipe, is they just put the front cat on it to make sure that that portion of it's satisfied.
I just looked it up. You're 100% right. It is actually a single cat. It's $1,600, but you have the option for an extra $200 to add a second cat, which that's really expensive. That's way more expensive than the other J pipes are about $1,300, and I thought that was expensive. When I saw that, my eyes just started watering.
I think one of the challenges is it depends on your buying power. ETS can probably, exhaust is what they build. They're selling a lot of these. They're probably buying the Jesse cats in a large enough quantity to get them for a good price.
Right.
If you're a smaller shop and you're just trying to turn out some of these J pipes and get them sold, you can't buy the cats in that quantity. They're very expensive, which makes the whole J pipe very expensive to produce. So, and I've seen a lot of folks, they've been complaining like, J pipes used to be 600, 700. Right. Why are they 1200 now? And, that catalytic converter is the expensive part. That's the most expensive part of it all.
Well, it hurts me because I want a J pipe. I'm actually getting one custom built, which is saving me a little bit, but that's the cat has been the cost issue.
Yep.
So another one thing that you mentioned was the clutches, and that is a big question because people are making some crazy torque. Now, when you said you haven't seen any clutch slippage, what torque ranges are you referring to?
400 up to, I've got a couple guys that kind of been wanting to roll the dice and push some more boost. So I've got some guys that are probably closer to 440 on the torque right now. And so far, no slips on those guys either, but I know it's only a matter of time.
Right. Well, I can't wait to hear when that happens because I'm also very curious.
Right.
So so people ask boost, what PSI? Now these guys that are running 440-ish torque, what kind of PSI are they at?
That's when you get to about the 21, 22, maybe even 23 mark is when you start getting those really high torque values. We've seen some tuners and some people put up some numbers that are closer to 500. They're probably hitting about 24 or almost 25 PSI, which is pretty close to where the map sensor stops reading it. Mm-hmm. There's a limitation there, but that turbo is kind of small, but it can spike some pretty big boost at the low RPMs, and that's how they get those big torque numbers. For the most part, I'm keeping most guys just under 20. I'll kind of ramp to 20 and kind of hit that mid-range power, but I don't really go much beyond that. But to get those higher torque numbers, we're talking 21, 22, maybe even 23 PSI to get there.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah, the clutch is my biggest because I want to do more things. And the few times that I've been out, I've definitely smelled my clutch very, very quickly. Which
you're launching, and to do a proper launch, you have to slip the clutch a little off the line. You can't just sidestep it, right? So your clutch is definitely going to be one of the first to go, I imagine, with the launches. The launching takes a lot of life off of it.
Yeah.
Just simple, and then the quick shifting and the torque holding is all part of it too. But you're guys that like to launch their car like you do, you're definitely going to need a stronger clutch at some point. Probably at least like a decent stage 2 clutch.
Okay, that's perfect because I've been talking to people in my community who have like modified STIs and WRXs and have some performance clutches. So I've been trying to gauge like exactly what kind of clutch it is that I would buy, and and this is a question from me. Was somebody told me, well, we have a twin disc clutch, just buy that. Then I spoke to another person. They're like, oh, no, you definitely don't need a twin disc. You just need a single clutch. So in my case, for somebody who does, like I'm going to be doing some amateur track days, I'm probably going to be going to the drag strip at my local track because they have it like every Friday during summer. For somebody like me, I'm not going to be doing a lot, but just amateur stuff. What kind of clutch should I be getting for my car?
Well, so my recommendation for this transmission is still the same as any other, 08 to 14 WRX 5-speed or any of the FA20 6-speeds, which are really just a 5-speed with an extra gear. My recommendation on those for most people is to never go beyond stage 2. And the reason why is if you build the clutch up stronger, and your clutch is kind of meant to be your buffer, right, between the engine, the torque, and the transmission. And if you have too strong of a clutch that doesn't really have enough give or enough slip or enough ability to kind of, again, buffer that torque from the engine going into the transmission will become the weak point. You always want your clutch to be the weakest point. You want your clutch to be just a little weaker than your transmission. You want it to be able to slip and take the brunt of the torque and not transmit it all into the transmission. Otherwise, that's how those 5-speeds break. And, the guys that I know that have broken the 6-speeds on the FA20s, it's always when they don't follow the recommendation, they put a twin disc in it, they put a stage 3 clutch, a putt clutch, and they go out there and they launch it a couple of times, and pretty soon, gears break, input shafts break. So stage 2 is going to hold that torque. It's going to be a wearable. Like if you put a stage 2 clutch in your car and you go out and you drag race it, hopefully if you drag race a lot, it might get you through a season. If you drag race here and there, it should get you through a couple seasons, maybe more, because it's gonna wear its life down when it launches. It's gonna last a lot longer, but hopefully it won't. It'll save the transmission, if that makes sense.
That does, because
Yep.
doing stuff like this, when I go out racing, people will always comment, oh, your transmission is going to blow up, your clutch is going to blow up. I've already understood that a clutch is a wearable item. I understand that that's something that I will have to change, just like brake pads, just like oil. Like it's you pay to play. I'm completely comfortable with that, and I'm glad that I asked you this question, or we even ended up making it this right, because this wasn't even originally on my mind. But clutches is the thing that I'm concerned about, and I will probably put one on layaway now, so when the time comes, I can get it changed. But this whole thing about not getting a twin disc, well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that was the recommendation that was given to me. Just get a twin disc. That's all you need. So, well, that's good. So those of you out there that are launching like me, now you have something concrete, some concrete evidence. That's really good. All right, Graham. So if you're okay with this, I'm going to start with the questions that we have.
Sure.
So what I have done is same thing as the second episode. I did take some questions from the comments and mixed it in with some questions I have, and some questions that Graham, some topics that Graham wanted to pull up. So the first question is from Brian Allendorf. And his question, and this is a really good one. Again, this is everywhere on Facebook, on Reddit. There isn't a single place I go where this question isn't asked. And that is, what oil should you use in the FA20 for? I know stock is coming 0-20. People are switching to 530. Graham, please help us with this.
Sure. Here's my oil talk I give guys. If you are leaving your WRX, your new FA24 WRX stock, you're not modifying it, you're driving it every day, a good amount of miles, and fuel economy is important to you. You use a little bit of boost getting on the freeway, but ultimately you don't go out and drive this thing anywhere like you drive yours. Stock weight oil and stock oil is totally fine. It's designed for fuel economy. It's designed for daily driving. It's designed for light use. It is not designed for you to beat the heck out of the car. It is not designed for adding 200 horsepower over stock. It's not designed for even 100 horsepower over stock. It's going to shear down too thin, and it's not going to protect the bearings and all the components inside there, including the turbo, like you want it to. Again, I can't stress it enough. Subaru's oil is not recommended because they want you to go race the car. It's recommended because they expect you to be driving that car every day and just using the turbo a little bit. So I always tell guys, step up to at least a 30 and run a good oil, like Multil X Clean 530 or 540 are both good choices in the FA20. They're important because they lack some things that can cause drawing a blank on the term, but direct injection engines have issues with LSPI, low speed pre-ignition. Sorry, it's early. I'm still drinking my coffee. But what low speed pre-ignition is basically down at low RPMs, there's a tendency for direct injection engines to have issues with knock, and a lot of it is tied back to additives in the oil that can combust. And so some of these multiple oils and other types of oils have been designed and take out some of those things to ensure that the popularity of direct injection engines being a thing now, that's not a problem. So X-Clean 530 is a great one. If you're pushing your car a little harder or in the summer months, then I recommend the 540 even if you're really running your car hard. So like you, when it rolls into the warmer months, I'm going to tell you to put in some X-Clean 540 or equivalent because you're running your car real hard. Through the winter, through right now, some 530 is okay. There is kind of a balance where you don't want to run a real thick oil in the winter because it's not going to warm up as quickly as you want it to and, get everything protected, because a cold oil is also, can be as bad for the engine as a hot oil. So there's a balance there. You don't want to just run some 60 weight in there and send it. You have to respect the fact that this is a car you're starting up more often. So, that's kind of my oil talk is, 530 in the winter minimum if you're running this car hard, modding it, tuning it, 540 through the summer for, harder use and racing it.
That's okay. So pretty much my next oil change, I'm going to have to change it because right now I'm still running 020 because again, I've had the same problem because I've heard so many different people say different things. And some tuners on Facebook are saying, yeah, well, we are switching to 530. And then some enthusiasts or veterans are like, well, no, it's just been all over the place. So thank you so much. That is very helpful.
You have to consider that Subaru recommends it for their own reasons. They don't expect you or want you to be modifying the car and turning up the boost, adding horsepower and drag racing it every weekend. That's not where their recommendation comes from. It comes from fuel economy. They want you to get that sticker fuel economy and be happy about that. If that's not what you're using your car for, you shouldn't be using that oil.
Got it. Perfect. Now, for people who do modify their cars and end up putting 530, what would be let's say they're just doing regular highway driving as well. How much of a fuel economy change are we talking about? Like, is there a perceptible, like, are we going to be able to actually see it?
That's kind of hard to quantify. I don't know. I guess, maybe this is an interesting thing for you to do some testing on if you can, is to, see if you can see the change in your car. 1, maybe 2 miles per gallon. It's not going to be like a 5 or 6 or an incredible drop,
right.
But it's going to have an effect, but not anything that's going to be that, to me, it's not such a detriment that it's worth staying on a thinner oil. It's a fair trade-off for sure. And it's not going to be a big one from my experience.
Man, there it is. That is like such a big topic, like everywhere. Anytime I see if I'm scrolling through Reddit and somebody says like blah 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 oil, I'm like, I'm not even gonna click on it. I don't even want to go in there.
I don't know if you remember this, but when you filled out the information form on our website, unless Misha did it for you, we asked what oil you run.
Oh, really? Yeah, no, I actually didn't.
Yep. So on our information form, when you fill it out for us, we ask you what oil you run, and that's always something that we check. My wife checks it, or I take a look at it, depending which one of us is setting up the request for the tune. I look at it, and if I see somebody running a stock oil or a thin oil, and I know their horsepower, know how they're using their car, we have that conversation with them because, Subaru engines they already suffer from the fact that they're a short, stubby engine with really thin journals on the bearings. Most engines that are laid out differently have a much longer crankshaft, and so they have much more room for wider bearings, and that means more oil can be in there, more of an oil cushion protecting everything. Subaru engines suffer from the fact that the bearings have to be thin because the crank has to be short because it all has to fit within the frame rails. This isn't even an FA24 thing. This is just a Subaru engine, like a boxer engine design flaw that's been carried over since the inception of the engine. So you don't want to play around with your oil on these cars because you don't have as big of a cushion as you do on some other engines. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So we have the oil talk with everybody because we don't like having to have guys contact us and say, hey, spun a rod bearing. We already have to deal with the ringland issue. At least we can control the rod bearing thing with some good oil, at least to a degree. We can't control defects or anything like that, but running a better, thicker oil and changing it when you should, and being conscious of that, not going out and doing 6 track days on the same oil change, changing it after every couple track days. People don't really think about their oil a lot, so it's a good one. But
wow, no, I can't even imagine. Like I remember when I did my track day last year, I changed oil before I did it, and then use that oil, and then right after I came, the next day I changed my oils back. Like that's again, because you hear so many things, and oil seems to be the center of some of these problems, like you said.
Yeah.
So thank you. That is a great one. Next, I want to start with Jeff Cartwright asked this question, and he asked this because of his experience with the 2015 to 2021 WRX. Is Are there any downsides to sticking with the stock tune on the 2022 WRX? Again, comparing to how there were some issues with the stock tune on the VA. So,
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
No, this is, I think we touched on this last time, but we can go into some more detail now, is that, but in my opinion, and a lot of other tuners I think would agree with me, this is probably one of the best factory tunes that Subaru has ever done for a car. So it, the EJs, they have issues running really lean coming into boost to try to meet fuel emission standards, fuel economy standard, or sorry, emission standards. The FA20 did some weird stuff where it would spike the boost like crazy and run kind of lean and knock, and then it would just dive pig rich. So the top end just felt terrible. It was like this spike of power, but knock, fall on its face, come back up a little bit, and then just kind of be disappointing to redline. That's the FA20 tune, in my opinion, of how it kind of behaves, and that's how it's tuned. The FA24, we've all seen the graphs. They made that torque like table flat. It's like it comes up and just holds at like 250 as flat as it can. They spent some time tuning this. They very modest with the boost, pretty good fuel curve, good timing curve. It doesn't ride the knock sensor. So honestly, like it's a pretty solid stock tune. It's not on par with some of the stuff I've dealt with, like German tunes on German cars tend to be really good from the factory. So good, a lot of guys don't even bother messing with it. Or even if we try to tune it, there's not maybe we can add some little bit of power here and some smoothness. But Subaru, it's a conservative tune, but it's a good tune. It's smooth. There's nothing wrong with it. I tell guys all the time, if you want to take some time, enjoy the car and do a tune down the road, you don't have to rush to tune it and worry about it as much.
That is the number one reason how I was sold when I drove the 22. I had my 21, and if the first thing I noticed was like exactly what you said. It felt so great in the beginning, and then at the end, it just felt like there just wasn't anything there, and it was hard to explain or to quantify as me just a driver, other than like I ran out of power or just power stopped being made. And as soon as I drove the 22, that was the first thing I noticed when I drove it. It felt complete. There wasn't any section of it where I felt like there was just something missing. It just felt great. And after I drove it and I went back to my old one, even though like mine was tuned, just the whole driving experience, I was like, man, I don't know what they did, but it feels really good. So good. I'm glad that you said that, because I agree as well. I didn't tune mine for a long time, and I didn't even bother putting an OTS on there because I never felt like I was missing something from the car. The car always felt great. And even after I tuned it, as long as the boost wasn't crazy high, there was, like when you had the FA20, there was a perceptual difference when you tuned it, like right away. And even when I put the OTS on my 22, it felt completely stock. Like there wasn't enough of it that needed to be changed, that I was like, that it felt like a whole different car. Like it still felt like an everyday car. I love that about it. Now, coming up, this is something that's been asked a few times, and actually I made a video about Etunes about this, is Protunes versus Etunes. There are still people that are new to the community and are a little confused about that. So can you just give them your experience on similarities and differences, if any?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I'm gonna touch on a few things and kind of clarify some terms. So people say OTS a lot, and that stands for off the shelf. That's terminology that I think Cobb came up with, or Cobb certainly uses to name their tunes that come on the access port. So off the shelf meaning, it's like buying something right off the shelf, no customization. It's a one size fits all. You go and you use it. You go and you put it on your car. So Cobb's maps are considered OTS, or off the shelf style tunes. An e-tune, that means email tune. If you're doing an email tune and someone's customizing your tune, you are working with somebody considered a pro tuner, which means professional tuner. And what that means is that, Cobb, through, their process, has determined that you are eligible when you're qualified enough. Again, there's no licensing for this. They just kind of have to have a phone call with you, see if you've got a dyno, make sure you're a full-time business. It's not, the bar to get in is not that high. You don't have to really take any tests or do any certifications. It's just, if you show you're doing this, they'll let you be a pro tuner. But if Cobb has agreed that you're a pro tuner, then you can write custom maps for people. You can email to them, and that is what an e-tune is. It is still a professional tune or a pro tune. It's just done over email, where you take data logs, most of the time on a road, on a nice, safe road, obeying the speed limit, obviously, and you send those data logs back to your tuner. Your tuner reviews them, makes adjustments, sends it back. There's software like Virtual Dyno that can be used to kind of estimate the power. If you're using the same road for all your poles and it's pretty flat, you can kind of get an idea from there. Generally speaking, the tuner is going to be using their experience with working with your platform and your mods on the dyno. So like anytime I'm doing an Etune, I'm basing it all off my experience that I have from working with the cars on the dyno. And that means I know how much boost is safe for different fuel types. I know what kind of timing curves make sense to work towards, because when you're not using a dyno, you can't find that last degree of ignition timing. You can't really find the boost that makes 5 more horsepower or 10 more horsepower. So you have to leave a margin of safety on the table. Whereas if you're working on the dyno, you can work right up to the maximum power, and then you can dial it back to a safe point to leave it on. When you're working on an Etune, you're just kind of working up to that safe threshold that you would leave a car at on the dyno, if that makes sense. So Etune, still professional tune. Dyno tune, it's just being done on the dyno. And, and as I kind of just said, when you're on the dyno working, you can definitely find the maximum the car can make. And if you're a responsible tuner, you don't leave it right there. You kind of build a little bit of safety into it to send it out the door with. If it's a drag race tune and someone knows what they're using and they only use it for drag race, it's going to be very close to that peak number. If it's a street tune, it's going to be dialed back a little bit. If it's a road race tune, it's going to be dialed back more, because you need a bigger margin when you're really running the car around the track for minutes at a time, not seconds. And then the final thing that's become popular, and even we didn't initially do this. We've never had off the shelf style, or the terminology I'm using with them is flash and go, just to have a different name and not be confusing with Cobb. But so we call it flash and go. We've never done this because even the FA20, I really don't, partially because in the FA20 days before the green speed stuff, there were a lot more things that you could do with these cars. So there were a lot more combinations. So, one size fits all tunes that we could provide just really didn't make sense, because most people had very different setups from each other. And I also just, in the early days of tuning those cars, we didn't have some of the fuel control that Cobb eventually showed us how we could do. There were some things where those cars are more sensitive. I don't feel like they're a good fit for off-the-shelf style or flash and go style tunes. But the FA24, it does have more of an ability, in my opinion, to have a kind of a one-size-fits-all safe tune. And so you've seen that, myself and some other tuners have started providing flash and go or off-the-shelf style tunes that kind of give you something for a low price, where you're not going to take logs, you're not going to fine-tune it. It's not going to be the full power of an Etune, but it's going to be something better than Cobb, a bit more power, but kind of a good, safe middle ground. So those are, an Etune from a professional tuner can still be kind of an off-the-shelf style if you're not taking logs and you're not fine-tuning it. So those are kind of the differences between everything, if that hopefully makes sense.
Yeah. So I think what we should probably do in the future, just based off what we're talking about here, is maybe don't need to call them Etune versus Protune. We should probably start calling them Etune versus Dyno tune, right? Look, I'm getting an Etune or I'm getting a Dyno tune, so that there is a clear distinction, because both are done by pro tuners. That's not the distinction. The distinction is, where is it happening? Your home dyno, which is your whatever backstreet you use, or the actual dyno. So, okay, and it all comes down to new users, new owners. Not, they see all these acronyms, they see these terminology, they just don't have a concept of, well, what does it mean? So I'm glad you brought the OTS part up as well. All right, so from tunes leading into I still have to watch my kid. So from tunes, I want to talk about, and actually there's something you brought, which is, again, a very good question. Some states have it, some don't. 93 versus ethanol tuning.
Okay. So, so pump gas fuels, right?
Yeah.
versus ethanol blends versus E85. So this can become a very deep conversation if we start talking about what E85 is. So for the sake of keeping this simple, people should already know what E85 fuel is. If you don't know what E85 is, there's lots of information out there on the internet. On our website, we talk about E85, we talk about flex fuel, we talk about blends. You can find a lot of this out there. But basically, gasoline's on the one end, and when you run 91 or 93 or even 87, it is at least 90%, if not 100% gasoline with maybe a 10% up to 15% ethanol added.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. So, ethanol becomes an additive because it actually can bump octane a little bit in regular pump gas. It can make 91 behave more like 93. It's got some good properties, and so they add it to gasoline to kind of as an additive package, and they have for a long time. Then E85 kind of came about. That is obviously 85% ethanol, 15% gas. A lot of times, obviously, it can be 70% in the winter and whatnot. What we're doing with these cars is, and this kind of came about on the FA20 because of the direct injection, we're a bit limited to fuel supply. We only have so much time to spray the fuel when we're spraying it directly in the engine. So running higher ethanol blends creates a higher fuel demand. And it became popular to limit ethanol to 40, 50, 60% so that, you get a lot of the benefits from E40 and up, and honestly, in my opinion, on direct injection, I've never seen a direct injection engine make significantly more power at 85% than it can make at 50%. So in most cases, in most applications, 50% ethanol is pretty much, you already have the majority of the benefit by that point. And E40 is very close to that too. And E40 means literally 40% ethanol and 60% gasoline. And typically it's about a 50-50 mix with when you're using premium fuel with ethanol in it. So in other words, your E40 tune, I instructed you to fill up, anytime you're filling up, you have to kind of understand how much can you fit in the tank. But let's say you're going to add 10 gallons. You'd put in 5 gallons of 93 with E10 ethanol and 5 gallons of E85. And if the E85 is 70% ethanol, the math works out to be right at 40. If it's a little bit higher, if it's 80% ethanol, you might be closer to 45% ethanol in there. And if it's a little bit lower, you might be at 35. But the way we tune E40, 35 to 45 works the same. It's safe.
Okay.
So that's kind of the trick there. We have some leeway in the tune by not running, maximum ignition timing that E40 can tolerate. We leave a safety threshold there. Same thing for the fuel targets. And then we can, the fuel control is closed loop, full-time closed loop on these cars, and how we can tune them right out of the gate, much like the FA20s, how we can do those, so that the AFR targets are maintained even if you're a little off with your ethanol. So we tell guys, for E40, it's a 50-50 blend. I like E40 for a couple reasons right now. One, we've tested it extensively. You don't need upgraded fuel pump. We've tested it with quite a few different modifications up to higher power levels, and so far I've seen no signs of running out of fuel. But it does respect that injection limit that we have. There's a few tables that Cobb hasn't hasn't defined and showed us yet that we have on the FA20, mainly around the injection angle, so we can kind of know where it's starting and adjust the starting point to give us a bigger window of time to spray. So to me right now, running the higher ethanol blends is a risk until we can see that and have more information. So in my opinion, E40 right now is that you get the maximum safe benefit of using ethanol, more so than than doing E30. Not quite maybe as much as E50, but until we have more tables, more information, that's where I like to be.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm glad, because I was wondering that if it always needed to be exact, because I actually have an ethanol tester kit and I test it I'd say once a week. And generally my gas station has been very consistent. It's been at 74, 75 the entire time I've been here. Let me go deal with this real quick. And okay, so now the next question that I have, this is from Smut Peddler. I will never not laugh when I see that name. He's actually asked a lot of really good questions, and this is a really good one because we have people that sometimes they drive to different locations to get tunes. They come back home, and his question was, how does tuning affect your car if you come from a lower elevation and get your tune in a higher elevation, or you're driving between different elevations?
Yep, that's a great question, especially with a turbo car. You know, again, try not to go into too much detail, but let's take a non-turbo car for example. Just as a quick example of what happens if you take your non-turbo car that you drive it around at sea level or near sea level, right? And then you drive to Colorado, and as you go up in the mountains, have you ever driven a naturally aspirated car in the mountains?
Actually, I drove my RX-8 because I was coming from Texas and I was driving through the hills of North Arkansas, South Missouri, and
Yep.
I noticed some things, but I wasn't paying that much attention to it.
So it probably feels a lot slower, right? It doesn't,
Yeah.
especially as you climb up into the really high elevations, like through Colorado, you get to the point where you're having to like hammer down just to maintain speed. And the reason being is because at higher elevation, the air is thinner, and engines consume they use air and mix it with fuel to create energy. And if the air is thinner at higher elevations, there's less energy there. So your car basically makes less horsepower as you go up at higher elevation. Now, a turbo car is literally taking the air that's around you. It's taking the air in at atmospheric pressure, compressing it, and shoving it in the engine. So it's basically the equivalent of if you were like driving your car under the sea and the air was really heavy. A
Uh,
turbocharger is making the air compressed, denser, and raising the pressure that it's going in there at. So why I explain this is as you go up in elevation, a turbo car can make up the difference. In other words, if you're making 20, let's say your car makes 18 psi at um, at sea level, right? And depending on how it's tuned, and there's barometric compensations all in there. If you drive up to sea level, drive up to elevation, if you go up 2 psi worth of elevation change, it's possible to run 20 psi, and your car has the same horsepower as it did at sea level. You follow me?
okay. Yeah.
So you can use boost to make up the difference of elevation, but you have to be careful that if you do that to a degree, the pumping losses, the engine's working harder, you might
Yeah.
start to run into some issues with, being too inefficient, getting some detonation, things like that. So when when you have your car tuned at sea level, and if you go to elevation, typically what happens is the boost stays relative and maybe even comes down as you go real high. The boost might come back a little bit to keep your turbocharger operating in an efficient range. So you might lose a little bit of power, but ultimately, if the tune is done correctly and the barometric pressure compensations are correct, it should run pretty well while you're there. We always tell people, look, if you're visiting Colorado from Iowa or wherever, you should be fine. Keep an eye on things. If anything looks funny, just take it easy on it. If you move to Colorado, then typically what we have you do is we have you take some data logs out there, and we will fine tune your car to be a bit more optimal for elevation. It usually doesn't need much, but there is a benefit if you live there to get tuned at that elevation using information, using data logs from the elevation. Vice versa, if you were tuned at elevation, you move to sea level, your car might be a little bit too aggressive down there, possibly. If it was being tuned in a way at elevation to try to make up for it, it comes down to sea level, it might be pushing a little bit too hard. So you might have to get it adjusted for coming down to sea level. So long story short, the compensations and a good tune should handle it no problem for temporary situations of visiting and moving and traveling. If you relocate from one elevation to a very different one and you have a custom tune, it's not a bad idea to work with your tuner to get an adjustment or just at least a checkup.
That's what you described was exactly the question that was asked was, hey, I go snowboarding or I go to do these things for the season. Is my car going to be okay or do I need anything else? And that you nailed it right on the head.
Yep.
So to just we'll just need to keep in mind, basically like any other situation, monitor your car. If you think something might happen, just keep an eye on it. So that's
Yep.
really good. So my wife's best friend lives in Colorado, and I will tell you one thing I really want to do is put some snow tires on this thing and head out there and just drive around. And
It's fun.
it, man, I don't. She's thinking about actually going there soon, and I was like, how can I get my car up there? And what's funny is they actually bought a Subaru as well. They bought a brand new Outback, And I was like,
Okay.
that would still be fun. They'd let me borrow it, take it out for fun.
Yep.
So, all right. So I have another question from this is user CVE. He asks, or she asks, if I'm buying a front mount intercooler, there's multiple thicknesses that I can choose. At this time, for what the bolt-ons that are available and the fuel that is available, what are the benefits for going to a really thick, like the thickest core, which I think is like 4 inches, versus going with something just like 3 inches?
Yep. For most people with these cars, if you are 100% sure that at some point down the road you're going to turn your FA24 WRX into a full-on time attack car, and you're going to add a Motec ECU and port injection and a big turbo and build the motor, STI 6-speed swap, and eventually you want this thing to be 600 horsepower running around the road course track, or perhaps say 800 horsepower making drag race passes, then that 4-inch core would make sense to start with. And otherwise, if you're just looking for a good front mount and you're going to be just doing bolt-ons, driving this car every day, not necessarily spending thousands of dollars to get to a point where you're going to have so much power where a 4-inch core makes sense, I would tell guys for sure, just go with the 3-inch core. It's really unnecessary to go with bigger. It's just more volume of intercooler to have to fill up. It's more lag between the shifts, and it's more lag on the spool up. So the 3-inch is more than enough. That is a fantastic large intercooler compared to stock already. There's no need to go bigger than that for normal, modest goals. If that's my opinion on that.
Yeah, and I figured that's probably what it was going to be, because and I know that the question is probably asked because of the price difference. Because I think right now it's like right at $900 for a 3-inch, and I think the top mount is like 800 or 850, and I think that's probably the question, because I think it goes up like $50 to $75 per half inch, and again, a lot of people, like I myself, a lot of people that buy these cars, you want to buy parts, but you also want to be price conscientious. You don't want to buy too much.
Yep.
But you're right. So there you go. If you're going to be doing really, really crazy stuff, which I'd say most people probably aren't, 3 inches is fine. That's a good one,
Yep.
because I'm actually, I want to front mount just because of the cool factor, like both figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
Anytime I think a tuned car, playing Need for Speed and all that stuff when I was younger, when I saw a front mount intercooler, I was like, damn, that's a modified car. Yeah, you
Well,
get
for
that.
what you're doing, any kind of racing, the front mount really is beneficial. It really does keep those charge temps way down, where the top mount, it's good. It's good for a daily driver. It's good for, squirting on the power here and there, merging on the freeway, and doing a little bit of spirited driving here and there. But if you're doing a lot of racing, the front mount really does make a big difference. It maintains the power that you can make. It maintains that power for much longer periods of time, if not almost indefinitely, because as your charge temp goes up, your power comes down, and your ability to see some knock goes up too. So I usually tell guys, if it's the top mount versus front mount question, I say, are you going to race the car quite a bit? Are you going to be pushing this thing? Go to the front mount. Is this just, you just want to like give your daily driver some better intercooling, but don't really plan on racing it or beating on it? A good top mount is better for that application, in my opinion, because again, better spool up, better response, less volume to have to fill up. The front mount's always a trade-off, and the bigger front mount is even bigger trade-off, like I just said before.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad. that you correlated that, because that is another thing that has been said, and I think I want to say it was probably the same with the FA20 as well. But even if it didn't, I'm getting one. It just looks so cool. That's
Yep.
gonna happen, and I know for me, maybe around the summertime, I'll probably pick one up. All right, now this question is something that is, again, just like the oil question. This is asked every single time somebody new buys a WRX, or I mean any car, and it's being asked right now because all these people are making 450 torque, 500. Don't look at some of the tuners that are doing crazy. Look at like what people are actually driving on the road, and it's still really high. And that is the warranty on these cars and warranty on customer cars. And have you experienced anybody who has had some sort of catastrophic failure and had to try to warranty their vehicle?
So far, knock on wood, on the FA24, we don't have any guys that have run into anything, with their engines, with their drivetrain, or anything like that. I think, we've heard from a couple folks that, needed to take their cars in for kind of like unrelated things, like, what was the one? I think it was something, something with their radio, their dash was doing something strange, and they couldn't fix it at home, needed to go to the dealer, and they were concerned about having modifications on the car, access port married, things like that. That's come up so far with this car. And then I can also just speak from prior experience with Subarus and people running into stuff where, you know, let's say they had their car tuned, had mods on it, engine was totally fine, but the transmission developed, some sort of an issue while it was still under warranty, right? And let's, for the sake of argument, say it wasn't abuse, it was just genuine issue with the transmission, right? Okay. You know, in those situations, and just in general, the caveat to warranty is that if you modify your car at all, you put an intake on it, you even put a cat back on it, the dealer can use anything they want against you to try to deny a claim. And not all dealers are created equal. People have different experiences, different dealerships, because dealerships get to kind of make their own decisions, depending on who owns it and who runs it. And then there's situations where sometimes Subaru of America will decide to get involved or decide not to get involved. So your mileage may vary, but generally speaking, you have to be aware that if you modify your car, you flash it, you tune it, you put parts on it, the dealer, if they know about that, if they see that and there's a mechanical failure, they can use that to try to say, nope, warranty denied, this, we think this caused it. There's arguments back and forth, people point to different, legislation and prior examples where, they have to supposedly be able to say, yep, this caused it, so
Right.
we're going to deny you. But, it not always the case. So we always tell people, you have to go into modding your car with that knowledge, right? And in some cases, we've heard from customers that, let's say they had an intake and an exhaust and the access port married, they had the dash issue, they want to take the car into the dealer, they take it in like that. The dealer says, hey, by the way, your warranty is denied. We told Subaru that you have these parts on your car, even if, like, let's say the access port isn't even in the car, right? But they see the intake on the car, see the exhaust, and they're like, hey, just to let you know, we fixed your dash, but your warranty's gone because you put these parts on your car. There are dealers that are that terrible. One thing that's helpful is to try to establish a good relationship with a dealer that's near you if you can, because you'll hear people talk about mod-friendly dealers. If you find a dealer, if you hear of a dealer and you go work with them and they let you know you have a good relationship and you have trust with them, and they say, look, we don't deny claims for an intake on your car. We don't deny claims for access ports. I have some Subaru dealerships, believe it or not, that do custom tuning and modding through me.
Really?
This is going to bake your noodle right now. I'm not going to name any names because I don't know exactly how that all works out in the grand scheme of things. I don't know if they have Subaru of America's blessing. I would like to assume that they do, that they're not operating in some sort of a illegal area under Subaru. But I genuinely have a number of dealerships that actually are mod friendly, and they embrace the aftermarket, and they will put an intake and an exhaust on your car, and they'll order a safe tune from me and give it to a customer as a package, and they'll warranty it if there's problems.
That, dude, it's
I know
time for me to move. I am moving right now.
So, but I say this to illustrate the fact that, again, because there's dealerships that operate like that really embrace what we do, and there's dealerships that are like, don't even look at it, don't even open your hood, and if you touch any bolt under there, your warranty's gone. There's both ranges of dealerships. So you have to understand this going into it. So, and some people on the other side of the story, some people, again, they got a dash issue, but they have an access port, they have an intake, and they're really paranoid about it, or they know that dealer is a jerk, but they need to go there anyway because there's no other dealer they can get to where they live. A lot of those people will return their car back to a stock condition, unmarry the access port, put the stock intake back on if you've changed it, put the stock exhaust back on if you've changed it, then take it in, get your dashboard all fixed up. They don't flag you for the warranty at that point. Get your car back, put your stuff back on it. That is an approach you can take, if you want to be cautious. So, the best thing you can do, in my opinion, is to, again, try to figure out what kind of a dealership you have that you can work with, and try to find one that has a reputation for, caring about, people, in a sense of understanding that we're just trying to have a little bit of extra fun with our cars.
That's, yeah. And I will say that I'm thankful that my dealership is somewhere in the middle, where every single service advisor, every single technician there has bought a car from there, tuned it, and now gets work done there. And even though my
Mhm.
salesperson, he's fantastic, he's part of our Subaru community. He'll when he's walking around, I bought like 2 cars from him. He'll be like, you can't modify anything. You can't
Right.
modify anything. I'm like, yep, I
I'll
got
tell
you.
you. I'll tell you that usually a good clue to finding those dealerships is finding the ones that frequently sell WRXs or STIs, when STIs were a thing. If you find a dealer that moves a high volume of the new WRXs and like really promotes them and tries to sell them, and like, the service advisor drives one himself, go in there and feel out the dealership and see if they really care about the performance models, right? If they're a dealership that sells one WRX a month and sells 100 Outbacks a month, they're going to be the type that's going to give you a harder time.
Yeah,
That's a clue right there. Go look at the guys that work there. Look at how they are. Look at what they drive. Consider their personalities. It all ties back in together with how they're going to be as a dealership.
you are absolutely right, because that's the one thing that I noticed when I went to get my first car was my salesperson. He walked me around and like introduced me to all of the guys that had like tuned bug eyes. Somebody had like a brand new 2021 white STI they just bought that month and completely tuned it, and like every part full bolt on. And so I was
Yep.
like, okay, this might be a place I want to buy them. And they hardly ever have any WRXs, maybe because they sell them all.
Yeah.
So, but you're absolutely right. I think that it really depends on the dealer. Um, just I guess you just got to do your research. And I know some people have mentioned that they only have like one Subaru dealership where they live, and then the next one's like 3 hours away. That's a problem. But if it's worth it to you to have somebody who has your back, then it may be worth driving that extra few miles. Fine.
Yep. It
So
can be.
that's a tough one. That's something that we're going to be talking about till the end of cars. The 2025 one, to the 2030. That's never really going to stop. So leading into the next question, this is somebody had asked, what is the highest mileage tuned FA24 that you've seen so far?
Yeah. And we spoke a little bit about this before we started the call here. Um, it's hard to know for sure. I rolled through all of my 22s I've tuned, and I noticed that the average is right around 6 to 7,000 miles at the point of starting the tune with these guys. Some guys have started tunes when they already have about 10 to 12,000. The highest mileage that we've started a tune from that I could see was about 15,000. And then, you know, I really don't know how many miles they've put on them so far, but I know that we had an initial round of guys that the moment the COG software came out, they contacted us and bought tunes, and they've been driving their cars, since basically about 2 months now on their custom tune. So depending on how many miles they drive a month, I would say that, most people average 1,000. I know at least one of my guys, I know he drives like 80 miles a day, round trip. So I think he's probably already put, you can do some quick math. He's probably already put about 4,000 miles on his tune. And I'd say we probably have some guys that are at that range. Then we have some guys that are about 2,000 miles, and maybe some guys that, only drive their car a little bit or don't have to drive every day for work. They take public transportation. They might have less, but I would say we probably have some guys that are, at least 2 to 5,000 miles tuned now since the tuning came out, and we have some guys that are already over 10,000 miles on the engine pushing them. And so again, so far so good. No issues to speak of.
Yeah, I personally I got my car in October 10th last year. And right now I'm sitting at about 90, I think it's like 9,600 miles. And I've been racing that thing since the day I got it. I'll be
Yeah.
honest. Before I even tuned it, I was racing it. I got tuned around, I think like 5,000, 6,000 miles. So I've been tuned for about 3,000 miles. And I'm like that gentleman that you spoke to. Because my daughter's school so far, I drive about 110 miles a day. And I don't particularly like it because mine just chew through gas. But I even when I had my FA20, I was up to 17,000 miles when I sold it. I had it for 10 months, and it was tuned since like 1,500 miles. And I multiple track days, drag racing days, just hooligan stuff on the road. Um,
Yep.
Thankfully, no issues, right? And even this one so far, other than smelling a little bit of clutch, no real issues that I can tell, and I know we've got a couple of people in our Facebook group that are up to, in the 20,000 mile range that have probably been tuned maybe at the 10,000 miles. So um, everybody's just waiting to see what happens. I know everybody wants to see what happens with some of the tuner tuned cars, like the ones that are not customer cars. That's really where the big, like, that's where all the eyes are, you
Yeah.
know. And I know a lot of people are watching my car. They see the things I do, and every single time I post a video, they're like, "All right, next time we're gonna see this video, this car's probably gonna be blown up." But like, now, I have not experienced any issue with it, and again, I'm
Yeah.
hoping that it stays that way. But if it
Let's hope
does,
let's hope you don't blow yours up. But if you do, we'll take it over to Misha, and you can get, I think, be the second. I don't think anybody else has built an FA24 yet except for Rick Wilson there, or
yeah,
Rick. Did I say that? I'm still drinking coffee, but Rick at DRP in Florida. He's the only one that I've seen. They're the only shop I've seen so far that has built an FA24 and dropped it in their car. So you could be the second one if you grenade that thing, and Misha Ecotech there can put one together, and then we can get really carried away and you know
uh,
do some other stuff with it, and go down that path. But I don't think you're going to visit that point anytime soon. These engines seem very, very robust, and I hope that doesn't happen, of course. But
yeah, yeah. But if it
you know,
does, if it
if
does,
it does, then
that would be
we'll take advantage of the situation, and we'll go a little farther. But no, I think what you're doing with yours, and the abuse you're putting yours through is definitely up there. We have some other guys that are doing the same thing, that are constantly racing them, highway pulls, everything, pushing it. So I have a group of you guys that are really leaning on these cars, and all of you so far are, not having anything go wrong with them, which is awesome. That says a lot about this new platform.
it really does. I think the biggest surprise is when I talk to somebody who has an FA20 and we compare the cost that it took them to build 400 horsepower versus the cost that it's taken them to do this. I mean, it's massive, right? All the checklists that they have to go through, make sure this is okay, make sure that's okay, this is up to speed, I've got this part, I've got this, everything. And I'm like, boom, there's an intake, there's some gas, we're ready to go. It is pretty amazing. And I'm very happy that more people are warming up to this car now that we're seeing progress that it's making. There's still some people that are stuck on the looks, which brings me to my final question, and I'm going to start asking this to everybody, and that is, are you, what was the question? I don't remember. Team painted fenders or team honeycomb? What are your thoughts on that?
What's the question?
It's one I made up. It's do you like painted fenders on it, or do you like the honeycomb pattern that it comes with from stock?
Oh, okay, I follow you. I've seen what I've seen that I like the best is, some people have been doing it where they paint some of the bumper, but they leave some of it, like they leave where, like, kind of like where the fake grills would be alone. I've seen people paint the entire everything. Have you seen that?
I have.
They paint all of it. I don't think that looks very good. But if you paint the plastic, if you paint the part of the bumper that, in my opinion, would have looked better from the factory already painted, and then leave those, even if they are fake grills, leave the fake grills black. When I've seen that color scheme, paint match the rest of the bumper, but leave the honeycomb part,
Uh,
the fake grills alone, I think that looks pretty good. That's my opinion of what I think looks the best.
and that's I think the most important word you said there. That's at the
Look,
end of the day all that matters.
yeah, we can talk data in terms of modifications and what power it makes, like that. There's some facts there, right? But the looks of the car, if you think this car looks great, if you think this car is ugly, that's an opinion. That's completely subjective. There is no right or wrong. You can't argue and say, no, these cars aren't ugly. If someone thinks they're ugly, that's their opinion. You know, I think, that I will say that the looks are growing on me, and I like some of the trends. I like the paint matching. I think does look really sharp. It certainly looks better in my opinion. I don't. It frustrates me that a lot of new cars are just doing more plastic and more, things like that. So I've always preferred the look of every, paint match, or as much as possible, and painted bumpers, painted fenders, painted accents. I like that look. That's my opinion. So when people do that on these cars, I like how that looks.
Fantastic. It's funny because like the picture that's been circling around in the groups is how the Lamborghini SUV
has unpainted fenders and unpainted bumper, and everybody's like, "Well, look, if it's good enough for Lamborghini, it's good enough for Subaru," which I think it's a very funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, Graham, this has been Graham. This has been really good. We got a lot of information out of this, and again, thank you so much for coming back. I hope to bring you back again for a third episode, just for you. Guys, I will make sure to link all of the links for Graham's website down in the description. Again, if you have more questions, definitely this is the place you want to ask them. Don't feel like any question is off topic. Anything you could think of, post it down there. We'll bring it up on the next next Tuner Talk. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next.